So for 4 years, we've been hearing, what if Russia mobilizes? I mean, they've got this massive manpower advantage over Ukraine. What if they actually used it, right? They tapped into their population, conscripted citizens from all across the country, threw them in uniform, sent them off to the front. Surely that would be enough to overcome the Ukrainian defenses, take all of Donetsk, and maybe even march on to Kyiv. Or maybe not, at least according to more and more Russian analysts that are saying more bodies sent towards the front just means more dead Russian soldiers. And one of them just said, quote, "We can mobilize as many people as we want to the front, but they will not be able to turn the tide of the war. That moment has passed." Now, the Russian issue with manpower largely has to do with Ukraine focusing their drones on the Russian infantry, with upwards of 30,000+ killed or seriously wounded every month, verified on camera. But Ukraine has manpower issues as well. A lot of that coming to light in recent weeks, with Ukrainian commanders actually being relieved of duty for not rotating troops out of frontline positions. More on that in a second, but starting on the Russian side here, Igor Girkin was asked this question. He's a Russian nationalist that very much wants Russia to win the war. His criticism has been that Russia has not gone hard enough at defeating Ukraine. He was asked if mobilization is currently something that should be pursued. And we're seeing this question pop up more and more in Russian media. And while I don't think it's going to happen, it's interesting because what that suggests is that the Russian citizens are looking at this war saying something has to change. We can't just keep doing the same thing we've been doing for 4 years and expecting a different result. One of the things that's always on people's mind is, what if we actually mobilize the country? Again, one of the things we've talked about from day one of this conflict is the size difference, the population difference that Russia has over Ukraine. And when you're talking about a war of attrition, as this has become in so many ways, why not leverage that resource? And now we have multiple Russian accounts saying because it would just mean more dead Russians without any real results. Girkin says, quote, "Mobilization was necessary in the spring of 22, 23, 24, and maybe even 25, but now mobilization is catastrophically late. Now, mobilization will not bring any result." He said, "Now there's a war of drones, which are capable of destroying any number of infantry introduced into the battle on any front, no matter how wide it is. That is, large masses of people and equipment will be destroyed without achieving any success. Now we can mobilize as many people as we want to the front, but they will not be able to turn the tide of the war. That moment has passed. I've been calling for mobilization for 4 years. Now I'm calling for the mobilization. Now I'm not calling for the mobilization I talked about before because it's meaningless. Our economy doesn't even have enough weapons to arm them with." Now, this is, being painted as black and white. We're certainly in that gray zone where, there's around 400,000 new recruits coming into the Russian military each year. 500,000 probably does not change the situation at the front, but that's a lot of new people mobilized. Does 800,000? Does 1,200,000? Like, what is the number? There is certainly some number in here where it would be, to be blunt, more soldiers than Ukrainian drones, which is kind of the calculation we're getting into at this point. It's pretty dark, but we are seeing how that prioritization of Russian infantry is playing out, which has been contested and argued as to whether or not that is the best use of Ukrainian resources. Conversely, on the Russian side, the Russian Rubicon unit has focused heavily so far this year on eliminating Ukrainian drones. They just issued a report a few days ago showing that 37% of drone strikes in the month of March was focused on unmanned systems of Ukraine. 17% were on communication and observation equipment, 16% on ground targets like field fortifications, 12% on unarmored vehicles, 8% on armored vehicles, and only 6.6% of drone strikes were focused on Ukrainian infantry. So 6%, we'll round up, 7% of Rubicon's drone strikes focused on eliminating Ukrainian infantry. Conversely, the Ukrainian unmanned systems forces, in March, 28% of their drone strikes were against Russian infantry and 25% in April, or at least the last I saw in April. So it's no doubt that Ukrainian drones are killing a heck of a lot more Russians than Russian drones are Ukrainians, which is leading to some of these Russian analysts saying, hey, we can send more people forward, but until we get to some massive number that has not yet been seen, it is not even in consideration, it's just going to mean more Russians dead. Military informant speaking to this discrepancy in what's being targeted at the front, he says the point is that the focus on hitting Ukrainian frontline drones and equipment, but not infantry, is a futile struggle that will never end. If the enemy implements his plan to deploy more drones, we will simply exchange our drones for the enemy's drones, while Ukraine exchanges its drones for our soldiers. With such an approach to priorities and hitting personnel, the Ukrainian armed forces will still be able to resist for a long time. Again, we're kind of coming back to that question of, to overwhelm those numbers, you're talking about simply needing more infantry on the ground than Ukraine has drones. That's a meat wave at that. Remember those debates from a couple of years ago about does Russia really do it, these meat assaults, and do they really charge forward into Ukrainian positions? That's kind of the math you're talking about with mobilization at this point. Unless Russia figures something else out, simply throwing more people into the slaughter is just that. It's just more people that are going to die. Now, speaking to the Russian manpower issues here, over on Two Marines on Substack, great resource. We've chatted with these guys before. It's Rob Lee and Dmitro Putiata. Rob, former U.S. Marine, and then Dmitro, former Ukrainian Marine. They said the Russian command plans to recruit 424,000 personnel in 2026 who will sign contracts with the Russian Ministry of Defense. However, for the fourth consecutive month, the Russian command has been facing difficulties in recruiting new personnel. If this trend continues by the end of the year, the Russian army will be 15 to 18% short of meeting its recruitment target. And this does not account for battlefield losses, which are rising, and they're also increasing in operational depth. So again, 15% short on personnel is a serious issue right now. You stretch that out over the course of a year, 18 months, 2 years, that is, put another way, the Russian army is getting smaller. That can't be sustained. So if you are talking about mobilization, all of a sudden you've got to mobilize back up to that 424,000 number. But that's not changing anything at the front. The lines are largely static and Russian casualties are continuing to mount. So if mobilization is in the cards, it's got to be a heck of a lot more than the 400,000 they're throwing at the front right now. Now, on the Ukrainian side, we've actually seen some challenging issues as well, focused on the swapping out or the rotation of soldiers near frontline positions. The bottom line, they're staying there way, way, way too long. The Kyiv Independent just reported a few days ago that Ukraine's general staff announced on April 24th the dismissal of the commanders of the 10th Corps and 14th Separate Mechanized Brigade over allegations of losing Ukrainian positions, providing inadequate support to frontline troops, and concealing the true situation in their frontline sector. They showed a picture of soldiers assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 30th Mechanized Brigade who were reportedly fainting from hunger and forced to drink rainwater. Now, I don't know the details here. This is under investigation, which is a good thing. You don't want this stuff to pop up at all ever in a military, but when it does, you like to see an investigation. In this case, they say the investigation is ongoing and will be forwarded to law enforcement agencies for legal review. So it's not just a matter of is the commander going to be moved out of their position into another role, but are they actually legally liable for putting these soldiers' lives at risk? So we'll withhold judgment until that information comes out. Good that they're looking into it. But there's a number of different reasons this type of thing can happen, from the neglectful to being a bad leader, poor planning, all that stuff, all the way over to it's actually just really, really hard to rotate troops off of frontline positions. Now, that said, that is a short-term issue. You're talking days, maybe weeks. But what we are seeing more and more, and these soldiers that you see in those pictures, it wasn't a matter of not getting enough food for a couple days. Like that clearly was a persistent issue. But what we're seeing more and more is conversations of soldiers having to spend upwards of 100 plus days in frontline positions. That is not sustainable. That will break a soldier. In fact, there's a new study put together by the Ukrainian military where they found that soldiers deployed for over 40 days on frontline positions develop apathy and, quote, stop caring whether they survive or not. To be clear, do you understand how that becomes, it's a useless position. If you have a soldier manning a position that does not matter if they live or die, they're better off not being there. Right? That's the situation they're finding comes into play after 40 days. One of the reporters here said everything beyond 40 days cannot be considered effective. And we know this. This isn't new. This isn't unique to this conflict. You have to rotate troops out of frontline positions. It's just not always that easy. In fact, in a lot of scenarios, we'll play some footage here of the 104th Territorial Defense Brigade. So this is a group that we are supporting and get more trucks. And this is one of the reasons, is getting to and from frontline positions can usually be even more dangerous than being in the frontline position itself, because you're exposed. And all of a sudden you're out moving along only so many routes to get to and from the front. We've seen countless videos of guys having to walk with a ton of equipment, 5, 10, 15 kilometers, and even then getting targeted by Russian drones. So they move into vehicles and try to carry out these infill and exfil as fast as possible in very narrow windows of time. Clear skies, that's a big risk. Those vehicles are probably going to get hit with a Russian drone. So they wait for cloud cover, they wait for fog, they wait for mist, they wait for rain. And then they go as fast as possible, get in there, drop off, pick up the wounded often is something that needs to be happening at this point in time. Can you imagine trying to walk a wounded soldier out 5, 10, 15 kilometers under Russian drones? So the rotation at baseline, not easy. However, 100 plus days, no excuse. And Deep State Map, the analysts over there, spoke about this, saying, quote, "The problem of long-term stay-in positions, which has already become well known to everyone, has intensified on the front line. The term of stay-in positions ranges from 100 to 300 days, and in some cases even longer. Initially, this was just a problem that people talked about. Then it turned into heroic feats, which were highlighted online, which looked absurd. And now it has gained perhaps the most widespread publicity with the involvement of the commander-in-chief." This was a few months ago. There was a story circulating about, I want to say 93rd Mechanized Brigade, 92nd or 93rd, a couple soldiers that had been in a frontline position for, I think it was coming up on 300 days. It was something wild. And it's this weird mix of you should celebrate the act, but also the fact that they were in that situation at all is a failure. Like multiple levels along the chain of command, that is a failure for those guys to be in that position for 300 days. Like all the way up from their direct leader, squad leader, team leader, whatever it is, all the way up to the commander-in-chief. You cannot have people in a position that long. And that, no doubt, is one of the challenges that Ukraine is facing right now, is they have a shortage of manpower, and it's very, very difficult to get people to and from some of these frontline positions, which is also one of the reasons we've seen more of a shift towards this drone wall. So it's fewer men forward. It's fewer infantry on frontline positions that are hard to get to and get from. The drones are taking a bit of that over, but at the end of the day, you still do need infantry forward. And a couple different reports here in recent days talking about how much of an issue that is and how it's just kind of understood at this point that people are going to stay in position well longer than the 15 days they are supposed to. And again, according to Ukraine's own reports, 40 days, they stop caring whether they live or die. That's not sustainable and something that does appear that it's being addressed right now, but could be a major challenge. So look, I try to walk pretty carefully in criticizing decisions on the battlefield, especially when you're talking about like in the heat of battle. I'm sitting here safely halfway around the world. Who am I to criticize someone with drones flying overhead, your buddy is wounded, the radio stops working, bullets are impacted nearby? Like, you cannot put yourself in that situation, armchair quarterback that, and say, well, actually, you should have gone left instead of right, or whatever nonsense it would be. However, when you're talking about 100 to 300 days of troop rotations not happening, I will criticize that, because that is not a heat of the moment type decision. That's not that you moved into a room, you kicked the door down, and you've got to make a decision of left versus right. You've got weeks, months to make a decision, to put a plan together to get your guys off of a frontline position. It has to happen. Just bottom line, it has to happen. So hopefully we start to see a reduction in this, because that is going to be a challenge for the Ukrainian military going forward. They already have a shortage of manpower. If guys stay at the front for 300 days, they're no longer effective. And they're probably not going to be effective for a significant period of time after they're taken off the front. So just, rationing the manpower, and effective use of the manpower is going to be critically important going forward. That's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.